Birth is God saying you matter. Your birthday is the day when your indispensable mission began in this world. We've created a very beautiful birthday guide. It's free. Check it out in the description below to make your special day even more special. Where does the soul go? We're even at loss of words. A loss for words, I should say. How to describe this? Do we call it afterlife? Do we call it passing away? What does that mean? Passing away, passing on? As we shall discuss, afterlife is not going to be a fitting name. That's why we called it life after life. Above all, I think any honest person has to approach this with humility. The humility that we know very little about life and death, and as demonstrated in such a powerful fashion when we have to talk about it. What happened before we were born, before we were conceived, and what will happen after our souls separate from our bodies. So whether you are a believer or non-believer, we all know there is a difference between life and death. Whether you want to call it a electrical surge, like electricity, whether you want to call it some other name, whether a mysterious name or a known name, whether you want to call it soul, as I've often described, I've often discussed, and those of you who have not heard it from me, let me repeat it again, the classic line from Levi Yitzchak Barditchever, the great Hasidic 18th century master, who said to a self-proclaimed atheist, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. The same is with soul. The soul you don't believe in, I also may not believe in. So the words are not important here. It's not semantics, it's not linguistics. It's whatever it is that we try to understand and feel that distinguishes between a corpse and a live body. I'll never forget the moment. It was 5:17 p.m. on Sunday in 2005 when my father, who was not well, that moment passed away, or whatever word you want to use. There he was, that vibrant, dynamic force that I grew up with, knew so well. Same body, I touched it, but now the life force was not there. You want to call it life force, so be it. But it's definitely something mysterious. It's more than just electricity. It's the personality. It's the psyche. All those layers of consciousness and subconscious and unconscious and superconsciousness that we know so little of. It would be like someone saying, dry the ocean and you'll have more land. No, it's more mysterious than that. The ocean isn't just land with water over it. It's a world of its own, a subterranean world that very few of us fully understand. We have in the recent century or two began to explore and discover the mysteries beneath the seabed. Beneath the sea cover, I should say, going all the way down to the sea. But what do we really know? And that's physical. Take the mind, take the emotions of a person, take the entire sum total of their lives. How do you describe that? Where did all that go? Not just the memories and not just the ideas, the whole complexity of life's experiences. What we are right now experiencing, our joys, our pains, our feelings, our loves, the things we are repelled by, what we're drawn to, our obsessions, our nonsense, everything. All that collective force, where does that go? So when it comes to a computer, you can say, okay, it's on the hard drive, I can copy it to another hard drive. What happens to all that force? So a humble person has to conclude, very simple. And an honest person has to conclude that we don't know. We know only the little world in which we live in, and from that perspective we try to understand everything else. So how can we then discuss this topic? The answer is, number one, we're told. We were told by forces that come from those dimensions where the soul travels, what it's like. Number two, human experience and human intelligence can lead us to places that are beyond the empirical. This is true even in quantum mechanics. There are conclusions that scientists have come to, physicists have come to, that we've never seen subatomic particles, yet we must conclude certain things based on other observations we extrapolate. the same can be said about human observation of life and what happens after life. We can extrapolate and come to some type of understanding. Couple that with revelation and insights that have been given to us and passed on to us from people, the more soulful of us, from divine forces, even from God Himself, that tell us a bit about the secrets behind the curtain that defines life after life. Now, just to mention, we know there are a number of books, a number of people documenting their near-death experiences, as they call it. And they come back to tell a story. Some are skeptical of, others are not. Some are very reputable and very legitimate, some maybe not. But clearly there's something going on, there's some type of other reality. Now, if you talk about people who've gone through that psychedelic experience, they will tell you that they've traveled to places within the psyche, within the soul, that you can't access in a normal way. And they too will talk about the soul in many different dimensions. Now, I'm not coming from that perspective, I'm coming from a Torah perspective, particularly the soul, mystical and esoteric dimension that does discuss the soul. But I believe I need to begin with an analogy, just to put things into context. Because as you'll see, the biggest problem in discussing this is not that it's just mysterious, is that we are so accustomed to the crutches of the way we think, to our routine and conventional perspectives. Not only are we accustomed, we're addicted to it. We're trapped there. That it's very difficult for us to really think about things outside of that context. So over the years, I've been asked as a rabbi, though I don't like to be called rabbi, but people think I am, though I have the formal credentials, but now is not the time to go into it. So I did go through that system and did gain the knowledge. So people come and ask the famous question, as I mentioned, where did the soul of my mother go to? Where did the soul of my father go to, of my grandfather? Are they safe? Are they at peace? Are they in pain? Are they comfortable? Can I connect with them? And we all grope for words, we grope for answers, we try to console, we try to share something and so on. One day, I don't remember why and how it came about, but I had an epiphany. And I realized that the question itself is based on a false premise. Now, obviously, you don't say that to a person who needs sensitive empathy and sensitivity and comfort. But when you're able to, and in the right manner, the question is based on a false premise. The premise is this, and this just goes to show you how many other questions we ask that are based on false premises that force us to challenge our own axioms and preconceived notions. And what is the premise? The premise is, I am here. I exist. I know what space I'm in. I know what time I'm in. I know what country, city, state, city, street, exactly where I am. I have an address. GPS can find me. I can find other locations. So I know I'm here. The question I have is, where does the soul go to? As if the premise is correct that you are where it's at, and your only question is where the soul goes to. Maybe your premise is wrong. Maybe our premise is wrong. The fact that you experience what you experience right now does not necessarily mean this is it. You could say this is what I know of life. This is my perspective, but it may not be it at all. So I came up with this somewhat ridiculous, you can even say, analogy, but it works. So imagine just for a moment a imaginary dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. And the refrigerator says to the electricity, tell me, my friend, where do you go to once they pull the plug? Electricity, of course, is generated into the refrigerator through a plug. We pull the plug, the refrigerator is wondering and asking electricity, where do you go to? What's the electricity's response? Incredulous response. Chutzpah, what nerve and chutzpah do you have to ask me such a question? You're a little box called a refrigerator that they just invented 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Human beings have learned how to generate my electricity and contain it in this box and have the right circuits and the right engineering and the right manufacturing that creates the ability to take this electricity and turn it into an object called a refrigerator that can refrigerate food. And you're asking me where I go to. I was here long before you even were created, before we were invented. I go back to my natural place, not confined in your box, not confined in your space and time as you know it. And you're asking me now where I go. Anyone hears this analogy smiles and says, of course. Of course, the whole question is based on the refrigerator thinking. It's the center of the universe. Electricity is not contained by space and time as a refrigerator understands it. You can't say electricity resides in this box, and that box, and this light bulb, and this cell phone, and this computer. You can say electricity is generated and energizes that appliance, that item, that object. But where electricity goes, electricity has its own space and time. Not to say there's no space and time, but it's a different type of space and time. It's not linear. So the analogy is just simply meant to point out how little we know, but more importantly, how our tools are limited. I always love an analogy from Sir Arthur Eddington. When asked about the conclusions that the quantum scientists were discovering in the mid-20th century, early mid-20th century, and some of them were bizarre. They call them bizarre. Spooky words like that. Counterintuitive. Insanity even. Einstein refused to accept conclusions of quantum mechanics. And scientists refused to accept it, but it was proven time and again. How do you come to bizarre conclusions about states of probability and indeterminate states? And all the things, Schrodinger's cat, if you know that analogy. All ridiculous type of conclusions about things you've never seen. No one has seen an atom. No one has seen subatomic particles. And he gave the analogy of a fisherman who spread his net across the seas and began gathering the fish that he caught and began documenting each one of these fish, the color, the shape, the size, the species. After he finished his examination and his documentation of it all, came to a conclusion. And he was about to announce it to the world. Brilliant conclusion. There are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. His little daughter, hearing that her father's about to announce this big announcement, like the story with the emperor with no clothes, says to her father, "Let me see the net." He shows her the net which she used to capture the fish, and the spaces between the ropes, between the net, were all half-inch wide and long. So what do you think happened? All the fish that are smaller than a half-inch fell back into the sea. So was this scientist right or wrong? He's right if he added one caveat, that when you use a net with half-inch spaces, you'll never catch fish that are shorter than a half-inch long or wide. But you need a scientist for that. So we can sometimes come to conclusions, but then we discover that our instruments were faulty. Our instruments were limited. Someone will say, "I don't see love." A little child will tell its mother, "You don't love me." The mother says, "I love you deeply. I love you from the depths of my heart. I love you more than anything. But I don't see it. I see a candy. I see a toy. I see a physical gesture." The answer is, eyes are too limited to see love. Just like the other instruments we have are too limited to appreciate ideas. An idea cannot be seen. It cannot be contained in a refrigerator exactly. So it's all about instruments and tools. So then you'll say, okay, fine. So all we have are empirical tools. No, that's not correct. We can love each other, and we can sense when someone loves you. Words from the heart enter the heart. You can feel love. You just need to look at other instruments. One of the Hasidic Rebbes, the Rebbe Rashab, was once playing when they were children. Children play what they see from their parents. So their father was a great Rebbe, a great master. So one of them dressed up like the father, one dressed up like a chassid, a disciple, and they were playing. The Razah comes into his brother, the Rebbe Rashab, who later would become the Rebbe Rashab, Rab Shalom Dov Ber, and he says to him, "Rebbe, tell me, what is a human being? What is a Jew?" He says, "A human being is fire." So he grabs his arm. The one brother grabs the other brother's arm, children, and says, if you're fire, how is it that I don't get burned? And his answer, when fire touches fire, it doesn't get burned. It's all the tools and instruments which we use. So to experience things that are not empirical, that are not body-like, you can't use body-like tools. You need to use soul-like tools. And that's what we need to develop. So there's two steps in appreciating and understanding life after life. And one is, firstly, eliminating the obstructions, the constraints, the narrowness of our perspectives, and realizing that we don't see it all. That's not meant to just tell you don't know anything. On the contrary, it's meant to say don't use your limited instruments and tools to travel to a place that requires much broader, much more ethereal, much more abstract type of instruments and tools, which you do have inside of you. But we're so trapped by our routines, we're so accustomed to certain instruments, we rely on them our knee-jerk reaction is to gravitate to them. That's that's what blocks us. And for the record, this is also a block in any given area. Disagreements we may have, conflicts, misunderstandings. It's often based simply your premise and my premise are basically different premises. And it could be both people have limited premises, which is always true. So the key is to get beyond those premises and see things from another perspective. I can't emphasize that enough. So this was done in the form of a workshop, which I guess it is in a certain way. I would work first on, let's see what tools and instruments we use to analyze, to examine, to evaluate, to explore, to deduce. And then let's see if we can access new tools, or perhaps less used tools. That's the key here. And when it comes to life and death, when it comes to life and afterlife, life and afterlife, there we must have broader tools, or else you end up having this. Here you see a body is alive, it's breathing, its heart is beating, the mind is working, everything is functioning. Here you see, God forbid, a body gets sick and ill, infection, disease, and then you see a body dies. That's empirical observation. And then we try to figure out what happened. So if you talk about it purely from a biological, mechanical perspective, you'll say the body had electricity in it, like a refrigerator. The electricity the body began to wear down, different parts, the motor, the engine, the different gauges, the wiring, the piping, the refrigerant that flows through the pipes. And therefore, once the machine began to erode, the electricity can't flow properly through it. The machine is weaker and weaker until the point that the electricity separates from the refrigerator. And then, who thinks about the electricity? Fine, you either buy a new refrigerator, or you don't use one, or you use other appliances. Do we apply the same type of rules? You could. If you apply it there, then you stay in your box. You stay in your refrigerator perspective, which is your box. Electricity now is left, and your refrigerator is gone. It's over with. The refrigerator can be discarded. However, and this is why we're speaking this discussion, we're here to learn it's much more complicated than that, and there's much more to it. If you suffice with what I just said, that description, I'm not going to go argue with you. If that's what you're satisfied with, fine. But I would assume if you're listening to this, you're interested in hearing about life, more about life than just what meets the eye or meets the other senses. Sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. So where do we go now? We go now, the truth is, as I said, if I was working with people hands-on, we'd first work on seeing how trapped we are by our preconceived notions and the conventional tools and instruments. But let's assume you've worked on that. Let's assume you accept the fact that that is blocking you. Because remember, even as we travel now into the soul type of language, we still are not free from our preconceived notions. You may acknowledge there's more to the picture, but it's still our natural gravitating place to go to because that's what we're accustomed to. That's what we're comfortable. That's what we relate to. You can't just move over, we'll call it, from a physical consciousness to a spiritual consciousness. Just because I said so in the last 15, 20 minutes. But you can work on it, and that's what we're here to do. What we're trying to do is how do you go into a more spiritual state of consciousness and awareness? Basically, how do you develop more ethereal tools and instruments? And that, in effect, will allow you to relate to another reality, not just when death strikes, But even while we're alive and we communicate with each other, because two people can sit across the table and speak to each other also on a very biological, mechanical level. I speak, you listen, you speak, I listen. It can go deeper, we care about each other, we love each other, we do things together. It could even be in a relationship, marriage, intimate. However, it still may be primarily a refrigerator relationship, two refrigerators. With some of the electricity, some of the soul involved, because obviously we're alive, and we're more than just dead bodies, we're more just lifeless bodies. We are two active forces, but it would be like either two animals, or two refrigerators, or two plants. Obviously, two refrigerators don't have a relationship, I'm just saying that, as I said earlier, figuratively. Or you can come to discover that the essence of your relationship, who you really are, is the soul connection. And as the bodies that only are the manifestation. You can see the handles. You can say the handles that bring together. I don't know how many of you are Trekkies. Trekkies are the people who follow Star Trek. So the original series of Star Trek had an episode. Now, Star Trek is a fictional, science fictional narrative with different episodes that traveling to outer space in the future, meeting other civilizations, strange civilizations. So in one place that they come to, they encounter forces that are completely ethereal. You just hear voices. They don't manifest in bodies. And they're an evolved race, and they've come to a point where they live in the world of spirit, not in the world of matter. But the main two people that lead that community were married at some time. But since they had died, they continued to live on as spirits, but as physical bodies they did not. So they asked two crew members of the Star Trek community who was visiting them if they would allow their bodies to be used as mediums for these two spirits to communicate with each other. Now this is science fiction. I'm not suggesting this happens in real life. But it's an interesting study in understanding how souls function. And that's what happens. And just for a short little scene, a very beautiful romantic scene, you see how the spirit of the man, spirit of the woman, manifest in two physical crew members of Star Trek, and they of the Starship Enterprise. And it's a beautiful sight to behold because they have not for years, for who knows how long, been able to touch physically. And how difficult it is for them to ultimately release and free themselves. And they knew beforehand that this would be a great test. But they were people of integrity, and they gave the bodies back to their original hosts. But you see the idea, it plants in your mind the concept that if you lived on that level, both life on earth and life as it moves on after this world, as we shall soon discuss, perhaps is the main life is that soul connection. And you come to realize that perhaps we're hypnotized and seduced and actually taken captive and trapped in this physical conscious reality, thinking like the refrigerator does, that this is it. And everything else is somewhat novel, somewhat out there, but not here. This is the center. Here is where it's at. And as you think about this, you wonder, do I have it right or not? Well, I'm here to submit and suggest that we don't have it right. And if you gave it thought and just step back and say, you know what, as a honest person, I'm going to allow another perspective in, you will come to discover, as many of us have, that it's actually the soul that is the center of existence. And it's the body, the refrigerator, that's only a short part of one leg of the entire journey. So everything is reversed. As some say, we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. Oh, so now comes the question, how do we explain this? How do we look at it? And then what do we do with this? We are, at the end of the day, we need to go to our jobs, we need our work, we have other responsibilities. So how do we handle this? But first let's discuss this next headline I just mentioned. And that is, who is the real me? So you can say you're a body, a refrigerator that has electricity in it. Or you're electricity that's traveling through a refrigerator, through a body. Which one do you think it is? It's definitely the latter. I'm not here to go make a case for it. If you want to insist and say, as I said earlier, that you're satisfied with a refrigerator life and hopefully that there's some electricity within you, this is not the place to get into such a debate. But I am going with the premise that it's the soul that is an ongoing journey, and it travels through maybe more than one refrigerator, which of course touches the topic of reincarnation, which I'm not going to get into. There's a series that you can find online that discusses reincarnation, as well as another talk I gave once called "Does Life Ever End?" These are just references of related readings or related classes related to this topic. But basically it means that the soul is really on this journey. Therefore, we can't call it afterlife. Afterlife suggests the false premise I mentioned before. This is life, and there's something afterwards. Perhaps that's not the case. Not just perhaps, it isn't the case. The soul is on a journey. The soul does not die because the soul wasn't born. The soul attaches itself to a body upon conception, detaches upon death, what we call physical, biological death, and the soul continues its journey, just like electricity continues its journey, unfettered and undefined by the body. But of course we need to say this, so that the bodily experience that we have in our bodies doesn't matter. Absolutely matters. It impacts the soul and remains with the soul in its memory. So when the soul leaves the body, or call it the life force, whatever name you want to give it, it leaves with the experiences it had. It doesn't leave with the physical body, obviously, remains below, but the soul continues its journey affected by everything that happened in its life, the positive and the negative, and continues that journey. So in that sense, it's a fascinating way to look at ourselves. We are not defined by when we were born and when we die. That's a critical component. That's up to us to choose correctly to live a virtuous life. However, our true definition, our true identity is a soul that is not bound by a body. So to appreciate this, you have to actually think in more soulful terms. That's why I use the analogy of electricity or the quantum mechanics. You have to think in terms of soulful terms. You can have a conversation with somebody about superficial matters. You go into a grocery store, into a mall. I need a loaf of bread. I need a cell phone, a smartphone. I need a screen. I need this, I need that. The negotiation, the interaction, the transaction is done between two people. Superficial, you move on. You may never see that person again, they may never see you. Okay. Then you have a conversation with somebody that's a little more, well, another superficial example, weather. A conversation about the weather. Conversation about something that is fleeting, that comes and goes. But then you meet somebody, and we have friends, we have conversations about things that are a little more significant. About your life, about your pain, about your joy, about the things you're interested in. And you share. What is the difference between this conversation and this conversation? So you could just dismiss it and say, this happened to be superficial, this was not so superficial. No. This conversation just touched upon two refrigerators communicating something in common interest. The other one is the electricity speaking to each other. So you'll say, 1 second, my conversation about the weather, or sports, or purchasing, is a corpse can't speak to another corpse. Yes, you can speak to another corpse, but you could be speaking on a corpse-like level, meaning minimal amount of life force and soul is invested in it. So think of it this way. Yes, you're alive. But what did you invest in your conversation? A very minimal amount. Think of it like you have, let's say, 1,000,000 watts of electricity and you used 1 watt. This is what's called the biological or the nefesh connection between two people. I'm not saying it's insignificant altogether. It's there, but it's using the lowest amount of power possible from the soul. Then comes ruach. I should mention nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. We're going through 5 dimensions of the soul. I assume since I've talked about this many times, I don't want to make any assumptions. 5 dimensions actually means levels of soul that you can access. The first 3 will be the conscious dimensions. The other 2 are supra-conscious. Supra-conscious. Some would call it unconscious. Supra-conscious meaning they're not quite tangible, but they're there beneath the surface. And as we'll discuss, the three first dimensions manifest in the body, and the other two hover outside of the body. So they all, upon conception and birth, as we enter this machine, our box, our refrigerator, they all connect, but they connect on different levels. I'm going through now human experiences that use and utilize different dimensions of this soul. So I mentioned the biological. That's the basic, most superficial interaction. The next level, ruach, would be an emotional interaction. You have no emotions when you're going to buy bread or another product or service. I mean, you may get upset about something. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the basic interaction is, here's money, give me what I need, I'm off. An emotional relationship is one that has some affection in it. May have emotional the other way around. So when you don't have affection towards something that repels you. But the emotions are now, you're using more than the 1 watt, you may be using 20 watts. The number is random, I'm just using it as an example. You've hired the flame of the soul's interaction. The next level is neshama, which is using your intellectual, the mind, two people of the meeting of the minds, an idea shared, a teacher and a student, two friends, two people who love each other, but it's now moved not just into the emotional interaction, but an intellectual one. You may wonder why is intellectual higher than emotional? Because intellectual uses also the ability for us to abstract and go beyond our subjective natures. So ruach is a deeper connection than nefesh, because now you're dealing with an emotional interaction, but it still has the subjectivity that comes with emotions. Intellectualism, the intellectual life of a person adds a measure of objectivity where your consciousness, you're able to actually see beyond your own interests, which only enhances the love. It's actually the intellectual part of the dimension of the soul that can make a love deeper because you're not trapped by just your impulses. So now you have a deeper, 20 watts, you've gone to 100 watts, maybe more. And of course, I'm just speaking in general terms, in the biological, in the nefesh, in the emotional, ruach, and in the intellectual, neshama, there are many, many levels in each one. I'm just giving you the general structure. These are the conscious soul forces, what we call koiches hanefesh, the soul's faculties as they interact with us. Now we are most comfortable with, going back again, is to the physical experience of it. Let's take the vision of the person. Your eye sees. You're looking at me right now. Or you look out the window, you look somewhere, you see something. So you relate to the physical see. I see a tree, I see a bird, I see a human being. I see Meaningful Life's Wednesday night class, Rabbi Jacobson. So you see with your eye, but your eye is more than just a physical sight. A corpse also has eyes and it doesn't see. And naim lehem v'lo yiru. You could have eyes and don't see. The eye needs a power of vision. And it needs an optic nerve. And it needs a healthy eye. And needs the message to go to your brain. And that processes the vision. The same thing with ears, the same thing with other senses. So even on the sensory level, we also need to know there's some force behind it, some electricity, some life force. The soul's power within it. So it's really, in the language of Kabbalists and Hasidic language, Ur and Keli. An energy and a container. The container is the eye, the physical nose, the mouth, the physical ears. The Ur is the energy within it. The power, the force, the life force. And I described them. The life force you can speak on a biological level. It's just the power to give vision. So you just look at something superficially. You could look at someone, with love, affection. Then the eyes are conveying more than just a physical sight, an emotional one. You can use the eyes also when you look at your teacher. You see your teacher's face teaching. The eye contact, the sparkle in the eye. There's a certain conveying of the face and the facial features of something being taught. So sometimes seeing your teacher will help you actually appreciate and understand the idea. That's just examples. Examples abound everywhere. Any experience you have in life, there's either nefesh, ruach, neshama. You could have all three. You could have 2 out of 3. You could have 1. Now you could argue, of course you could have a nefesh experience without the ruach, without the neshama. You could have just the biological experience of seeing something. You could look at a piece of art in a superficial way, say, okay. You could look at a piece of art with an emotional way and say, wow, my heart is attracted, my emotions are stimulated by this piece of art. You can look at a piece of art and intellectually appreciate it. So you could have all 3, 2 out of 3, 1 out of 3. Can you have only neshama only the intellectual and only the emotional without the nefesh, not in this world. Because in this physical world, we need a physical object, therefore we need a physical eye. Like I said before, the hand touches a hand, there are hands. Fire touches fire, it's fire. However, if you were to free the soul from its body, you could hypothetically have a ruach neshama, an emotional and intellectual experience without having a physical experience. Fascinating, isn't that? That's how souls experience things, but they don't have the final container, the medium, the holders. I said before, looking for the right word. Well, the holders is a good word. Something to grasp, to contain that energy. Now, what about the other two? Chaya Yechida. So Chaya is the transcendence of a human being. This already is transcendence of the soul, is already not conscious. It's that which is beyond that you can sense. And Yechida is like the essence of the soul. And even that's not the essence, it's still 5 names, 5 levels of the soul. The essence of the soul we will not discuss right now. That goes into another dimension after you first appreciate these 5. Then we can talk about that. We'll do that another time. So Chai Yechida takes you now into the journey, the transcendence of a person. Transcendence is not intellectual, nor emotional, nor biological. So what is it? It's a sense of something beyond. A sense of a human being is not satisfied just with the routine, with the humdrum and the monotony of survival. It's something, I need something to get out of my monotony, out of my routines, out of my habits. Transcendence can be experienced through travel, through art, through music. It can be experienced through love, through romance, through sexuality, intimacy. It can be experienced through religion, faith, and God. These are all transcendent experiences. There are transcendent experiences that are healthier, others are not that healthy. Others come with side effects and a price to be paid. Not always positive. But here you're going more than just, if you're looking at that art that I mentioned, let's take the art. You could see the art, very basic level. You could see the art and have an emotional experience. You could see the art and have an intellectual experience. You could see the art and have a transcendent experience. That's more than the sum of the art. It's not just analyzing, it's not just appreciating it and understanding it, but it's also having a transcendent experience. The same thing with music. So the same person can listen, or same people, a bunch of people could be listening to the same piece of music in these 4 ways. And I'll talk about the 5th in a moment. You could hear music at a very basic level. A child could hear music, doesn't appreciate it, but hears it. It's a nice melody, puts them to sleep. Nice harmony. Another person has an emotional experience. It reminds them of an emotional relationship. It evokes different feelings, different existential feelings, loneliness, joy, and so on. Transports you to another time and place. You can have an intellectual experience. An understanding, another dimension of understanding enters in through your listening to the music. And then you have the transcendent experience. And again, you could have all 4. You could have 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4, and you could have 1 out of 4. Can you only have the transcendence in this physical world and the intellectual and emotional without the biological? No, because we need physical ears to hear physical music. But here you see a perfect example of what I was discussing. What is the primary experience? The fact that your ears could hear the music? That's just a necessity in the physical world. There's no way for us to communicate. If I don't make a sound, you have to hear it. You can't hear my silence. But the real experience is once you hear the words, it's what the message that the words convey, the emotional, intellectual, or transcendent message. What about the 5th dimension? The 5th dimension, you can say, is the transcendence even of transcendence. Sometimes called neshama l'neshama, is a name for both, I should say, a name for 4 and 5. But chaya would be like the transcendent experience, and then you're transcending even the transcendence. You're getting to a point which is like a singularity. Yechida means singularity. There you just experience something in a certain serene inner way that's not even the excitement of transcendence. It just like touches and resonates the core of who you are. Now obviously that's a rarer experience, and that's what we call a magical moment, a transcendent moment. But beyond, I should correct myself, not a transcendent moment, a moment that transcends even transcendence, certain resonance of truth, of saying, this is where I am, this is where I belong, this has touched me in the real me. So you could have a transcendent experience, but it's still going outside of yourself. What's called in Hasidic language, rotzen, the outer dimension of keser. I'll soon give you the Kabbalistic structure for all of these. Ratzon. Ratzon means you desire something. Ratzon also comes from the word merutza. I desire, I pine for something. I yearn for something. I run to it. But it's suggesting you have to go transcend. Transcend from what? Transcend from your refrigerator to transcend outside of the refrigerator. Okay. But then there's a point, what's called tainug, which is just inner peace, inner joy, inner pleasure. That doesn't have to go anywhere. It's just you residing in your most serene inner core, peace at your center. So that's called the inner dimension of Kesser. So let me lay it out for those that want to know the Kabbalistic structure. It works like this. We'll start from the bottom up. Nefesh usually corresponds to Nehi, which is Netzach Chayjasei, the 3 or 4 of the lowest of the 10 spheres. Action-based, biological. Chagas, Chesed, Gur, Teferes is the emotional dimension, which refers to the Ruach, the emotions of the soul. Chabad, Chochma, Bina, Das are the intellectual, the Neshama dimension of the soul. Then above that comes Keser. Keser is the crown, which is made up of 2 parts. Arich Anpin, which is the Ratzon, the transcendence of Chaya, and Atik Yemen, which means removed completely, the Tainug of Yechida, the pleasure and inner peace, that inner core, that inner peace of the core at the center, that is Yechida. In the worlds, if you're interested in how it works in the worlds, so we have 4 worlds. Going from the bottom up, Asiya corresponds to Nehi, to Nefesh. Yitzira, the world of formation, corresponds to Chagas. Zoh mekanano be-Yitzira, which means Zoh, Midas, the emotions, they are nested in the world of formation. Bina, mekanano be-Kursaya, Bina, which is intelligence, the primary part of comprehension, is nested in Bria, which is the world of creation, the first world of creation, which corresponds to Neshama. Atzilus is Yechida, is Chaya, specifically Chochma, which Abba Mekanna Atzilus, which is that Abba Chochma, called the Father, is nested in Atzilus, the world of unity, the world of transcendence. And then there's Keser in general, or the worlds of Ein Sof, which is beyond the 4 worlds. The 5th dimension is Yechida, which is that inner core that I described that doesn't have any expression. It's just that calm inner place. It's silent. Where transcendence can be alive and you can feel it and sense it. It's beyond you, but it's still part of an experience. Where Yechida is you're not even experienced. Object and subject have fused and melted into one. Dissolved into one. Whereas in Yechai you still have an object and a subject, but it's a transcendent experience. In intellectual neshama you definitely have an object and a subject, but it's an intellectual connection. Then there's the emotional connection of Ruach, and then there's the most basic, which is just 2 objects to connecting to each other on the most basic level. And as I said, you can have all 5. But in this physical world you need to have number 1, because if not you don't have the handle. You don't have what to hold it, the handles, that's the word I was looking for. The thing to hold it, to contain it. It's like a flame without a wick. Now, when the soul leaves the body, that's what happens is the connection on the biological level ceases. But everything else remains. So you no longer have a container. Think of it like the ideas in a book, and the book got burned, God forbid, or torn. The ideas still remain. They just don't have a place to manifest. So you can't read them in a book. You can't share them with someone. But someone that heard those ideas can share it with someone else. So the spirituality of the soul, which is primarily beyond the biological, frankly, even nefesh, even the lowest, also has a soulful side. Because at the end of the day, when a person passes away, even the nefesh passes away. But the lowest level is what touches the body. That ceases to be when we encounter physical death. But the other dimensions continue their journey. And they will continue their journey on the emotional, intellectual, transcendent, and core place forever and ever. Because they had that journey before they came and connected to the refrigerator. So that's how you have to see the soul. Now, you could say, well, this is a lot of interesting stuff, but I'm not there. That's exactly correct, because to get there, you need to think soulfully. You're not going to connect with biological tools, with a net of one in space, or with sensory tools and try to understand suprasensory experience, or try to experience suprasensory experience. You need to be able to broaden the instruments, or better put, to gain new instruments, or instruments you have already. You want to feel someone else's heart, their emotions to you, you have to be emotional. You can't come with a battering ram or with a wrench and try to pull someone's emotions out of them. You have emotion speaks to emotion. Kamayim apanim lapanim kein leva adam la'adam. The heart of a person reflected in another heart, like water is a face reflected in water. You're going to try to get someone else's heart reflected in you without using your heart. So you'll have the equivalent of trying to see love with your eyes. It doesn't work that way. So the more we refine, the more we develop and cultivate our ethereal, soulful tools and instruments in connecting with each other right now in this lifetime, the more we can understand, appreciate, and connect with souls beyond this lifetime. Now you'll ask me the question, am I or others that I know able to do that? I can't say I've mastered the art, no, but I've known people who lived a life that is so soulful, for them wasn't a big thing. That's where they reside. They reside in soulful places. Just like right now, you can speak to people and share with them your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and there's no one to talk to. If you tell them where you're traveling to, you tell them how many frequent flyer miles, they'll give you tips, what credit card to use, how to fly here, how to fly there, here's a nice place. There's a lot of people that can do that. But if you want an emotional experience, you need someone that can identify with you, someone that you resonate with, someone that you feel gets you. You need to find someone that has that type of capacity to be more soulful. Now, as I said before, there are many, many levels and variations on this issue. So that's who we have to explore and grow, climb the ladder of becoming more and more ethereal. Now, this is not an overnight exercise. If you begin, and I'll talk about some steps how you get there, you slowly refine those tools and you become less callous, less coarse, and more sensitive to this energy that is flowing right here, right now, where we are. It'd be like the equivalent of someone in the middle of a rush hour trying to hear a violin, a virtuoso, playing the most subtle strings. How could you hear when all the noise is going on? If you have turbulence. And of course, this is a physical example, but the same thing is psychologically. If physical turbulence, if your mind and heart are consumed with hate, with anger, with vengeance, with pettiness, of course you're not going to hear the song of your own soul and the other deeper levels. How can you? You're completely consumed. It's like carrying a weight of a few hundred pounds and trying to pay attention and focus on something. So the first thing we need to do to get to these states and understand life after life and where soul goes to is freeing ourselves from the baggage, the material baggage that traps us, yes, on the superficial, mechanical, technical level of life called survival. The more you're bogged down there, the more difficult it is to listen to more subtle music. So the first thing you need to do is make an assessment, accountability. Where do you stand? List what you're involved in. Create space. Before we get to that. List what you're involved in and see how much of energy, time, and focus it's taking from you. There's no way that if you're busy and overwhelmed with life as it is, that you're going to suddenly be able to experience something soulful. You could experience it by grace, you could have a moment of respite, you can have a glimpse, but I'm talking about something sustainable and lasting. Once you come to a true and honest assessment, which may surprise you, because many people do not know how much they are consumed with darkness. And I would say darkness consumed with materialistic pressures, desires, expectations, escape. We have a life, and a life is often very, very trapped, more than you may think. This doesn't mean that you feel trapped. But in fact, the matter is what you're consumed with, what you're involved in, is all about things that are dragging you down. Which is why so many people say, I'd love to be able to have a situation where I can escape, go into a forest, into nature, shut off my cell phone. Everybody welcomes those moments. Why? And then you suddenly realize there's another reality, because we're so consumed with what we're involved in that it's very hard for us to be able to really experience a transcendent moment. So what most of us do is we compartmentalize. We compartmentalize, which means most of our lives is in the survival mode, and from time to time, weekends, vacation, holidays, where we designate some time to have some type of deeper experience. But then we go back to where we were. It's only an escape. It's a refrigerator having a taste a little of electricity. If you want to grow and become who you really are and access the true potential, realize the true potential you're capable of, you need to do more than that. You need to first analyze and assess where you're at and say, I need to change some things in my life. Now, change doesn't come easy, so I would suggest it step by step. Don't bite off more than you can chew. In the morning, start saying Moda'ani. That one-line prayer that I speak about often, that acknowledges my soul, the renewal of my soul, the renewal of my contract and purpose of my being in this world. Just recognizing that the mystery of sleep awakens us, no pun intended, to the reality when we awake, that there's a soul within our beings that has gotten refreshed, ready for a new day. Acknowledge that force inside of you. Don't change the rest of your day, but at least acknowledge that force. And with words, actually saying, just like you would pay attention to your child, not just say, I love you in my heart, but say, I love you, I embrace you, I hug you. Same with your soul. Hug your soul, embrace your soul, articulate it. A minute, 2 minutes. Then throughout the day, try to find pockets where you think about this. You're really involved in some type of business transaction or some negotiation or some problem at work. Pause, take a break, pause and say, you know what? I'm a soul within a body. I'm not the body. I'm not the refrigerator. I'm the electricity. Give it a moment of time. Say a prayer, read a spiritual thought, a poem, listen to some music. Help someone, give them someone charity. And I mentioned here 3 things, if you noticed: action, emotion, and intellectual. Action is helping someone, a charitable act, volunteering. Emotion, ruach, that's nefesh. Emotion, ruach, is prayer, emoting, getting in touch with your feelings about things. And intellectual is neshama, is studying something, reading something. Let it stimulate your mind. But not just a business manual, something that's about a little beyond survival mode. Now, transcendence, if you do these 3 things on an ongoing basis, you'll begin to taste more and more transcendence. Transcendence, you may have to wait for a Shabbat, a weekend, or when you have a little more time that you can really have an experience that's just beyond the regular, on an ongoing basis. But the key is to feed, just like you would feed your body, you need to feed and nourish your soul. Flowers blossom when you water them, not when you tug at them. We need to water our flower. We need to nurture, cultivate the soul, which is the flower within you. And then the flower comes back and repays you many times over with its soulful message. You do this on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis, and you find new other exercises. I just gave a few examples. And you work at it. This should be a life commitment. You'll see the results. You'll see yourself becoming more soulful, being less impacted by survival and petty, superficial, short-term elements of your life. And above all, you begin to connect to those dimensions of the soul that live on, that live on, in different forms. So just like you take a body of water, pot of water, and you can freeze it, it becomes ice. You can heat it, and it becomes gas, but it never disappears. The soul, too, goes through different forms. It's in its form within the body, it manifests within the biological, so you see it. It can be even like ice or water, which is more subtle. Or when a soul leaves a body, it's like comes into gas. The gas is there. It's again an analogy, not exactly, but an analogy. So you see here, my friends, that life after life is very much part of who we are right now. It's not just what happens later. It's what's happening now. Every commitment we make, every action, every emotion, every thought, and every transcendent and unifying experience, all 5 levels of the soul that we do now, actually allows us to appreciate the soul's ongoing journey. Because if a person dedicates their entire life just to the physical, biological, then when their soul does separate from their body, what happens? They're not accustomed. The soul knows that it's a soul, but the person's consciousness is not accustomed to soul experiences. That's why the Talmud says that you cannot enter here without having Talmudei biyadei. You need to have the study. You need to have the experiences. It would be like getting a soldier, suddenly the war breaks out, and say, go ahead, without any training. You need to acclimate yourself to soulful experiences, training. So when the day comes, when all you have is the soul, you're very accustomed to it, and you're prepared. Now, this doesn't mean that a body that has not had any soulful experiences, which is really impossible, everybody has had some, this doesn't mean that you cannot have the connection. But then it's a whole other work, because you have to first somewhat cleanse and what's the word I want to say? Like open the pores and free the toxins that petty, impermanent, superficial life has imposed upon the soul. As I said before, the soul remembers everything, also the petty stuff. It's not its natural state, but it's experienced it because it's dragged along in this life. So, if we're talking to people, or to anyone listening that has lost a parent or a relative or someone that you care about, know that the soul continues the journey, just like it preceded the journey called life as we know it. And this physical world, as important as it is, and as important, as central as it is to our lives, it's just one leg of the journey. It's the refrigerator. And the refrigerator's experiences in life. But the electricity preceded the refrigerator and follows the refrigerator and will continue to live on afterwards. We don't call it afterlife, we just call it life in different forms. We'll definitely speak about this some more. I hope this at least lays out the basic principles and the foundational principles of what a soul is, the different dimensions of the soul, and thus understanding the soul's journey and its ability to continue its journey. But it all begins right now, which means how we behave right now, as we act right now. A more soulful way, a more body-like way. As I said earlier, it's very difficult to begin and just suddenly jump after years and years of conditioning and programming and habits that are all based on refrigerator thinking, on appliance form of thinking, survival thinking, and jump to the soul thinking. But you can begin immediately because your soul does not have to come from anywhere. It's sitting right now inside of you, waiting to be released. And that release is the key lays in your hands because you are the one that can open the door to all dimensions of the soul that I described. So may we all be blessed with a soulful week, a soulful year, soulful life here on, and for many, many healthy years of the soul inside of the body, but in a soulful type of experience that will continue forever and ever. Thank you very much. We will be continuing this class as we do every Wednesday night, and if you haven't signed up, please do so at meaningfullife.com. We can send out the notices so when the classes are on location and live on location and online, we notify you. We also notify the topic. And if it's only online as it is this week, that too will be notified to you as well. And please be in touch. Any questions you may have, any other ways that we can help you in your soul's journey, that's what the mission and purpose of the Meaningful Life is. Thank you, and everyone be well.